Hi, this is Sean Johnston from Centric Wealth Advisory. This is a video that I would like to go through regarding a template that can help anyone wanting to learn how to calculate future values as well as present values, which are very vital when it comes to financial planning and any planning for that matter when it comes to savings or for retirement planning. I'd like to do a share screen with you. This template is available for download. You are welcome to download this template and go through it with me. The purpose of this template is for educational purposes. It is for you to start learning more about the impact of compounding your contributions or lump sums in an investment and the impact of investing for the long term. So I'm going to do a share screen now with this template and go through this template with you, that you have a better understanding of how to plan more effectively when you are factoring in contributions, escalations, and of course, obviously growth. So on this template over here, we've got two tabs. The tabs consist of numerous calculations that one can make when you're planning from a present value to a future value. And then on the second tab, it is working backward, which is having a future value and then calculating a present value. And the intent of this is to understand the implications of compounding periods, whether you're investing as a lump sum, as a level contribution, or if you're going to be escalating those contributions, and how regularly to make those contributions to determine the future value. So the first calculation I'm going to show you is with a single lump sum payment, which means that you make a once-off payment into an investment and you leave that for a period of time. In this example, let's work on a growth rate of 10% to keep it simple, to make it 10 years. So what we're saying is if we invest 300,000 into this investment once off, and we get a 10% growth rate compounding annually for a period of 10 years, you will have a future value at the end of your 10-year resulting in 778,122 Rand. And it's explained over here. If you invest 300,000 Rand over a period of 10 years and achieve an annual compound growth rate of 10% per year, the future value would be 778,123, rounding off. If you were to take 778,123 and put it into this, which is the future value, we said the growth rate was 10, and we said that the term was 10 years, we can work backwards and we can calculate the present value, which is obviously applying exactly the same principles. The difference is you know what the future value is. You want to calculate what must I have today to achieve this future value 10 years from now. And this is quite important because you might have a set goal, let's say 10 years. You would have wanted to have raised, in this case, 778,000 Rand to maybe pay off debt, to maybe put towards a purchasing of a home, whether it be putting towards studies, whether it be putting towards your retirement, whatever the case is, or for your child's education at university. This is where knowing a future value would be quite useful, to know what you need to put away today, because you can calculate what the estimated future tuition fees are going to be, and then you can determine what you would need to put away today and leave that for 10 years and look at getting a compound return of 10% per year. Obviously, bearing in mind, one always need to reassess their portfolio to ensure that it is reaching its target returns, because the asset classes that you go into will be quite key in this calculation. 10% means that you would need to be exposed to volatile asset classes such as equities, and that could be local or short depending on your risk appetite. But that's where a financial planner will give you the full disclosure in terms of the risk versus reward going into the various asset classes. The second calculator we would look at here is making an annual level payment. Let's just keep it simple and make it 100,000, 10, 10. Again, the difference is that we now have the beginning and end mode. What this means is if you make your payment at the beginning of the period, you're making it at the beginning of the year. If you make the payment at the end of the year, then obviously you're going to have that 1 year of compounding that you're not going to receive. The best way to explain this to you is if we change this to 1 year, 100,000 Rand grew at 10%, 110,000 is the future value after 1 year because you've added 10%. If this was end mode, this would be 100,000. Why? Because you made the payment of this 100,000 at the end of the year, and therefore that 10% was not accrued in that period because you made the payment at the end of the year. So this is quite important because when you're investing towards any goal, making the payment at the beginning of the period is what you should ideally be doing. If you put it back on 10 years, 100,000 Rand invested per year, growing at 10% per year for a period of 10 years will get you to a future value of 1,753,117 rounded off. And then on converse, of course, obviously, if you were to work out the future to present, you would take 173,117, 173,117, 1753, 7. You said it was 10%, 10%. Begin. So now, again, if you know what the future value is in 10 years, and you don't want to make a lump sum payment once off because you, let's say, don't have the capital, you could save 100,000 a year. Then you would need to consistently do that and achieve a 10% return compounding annually to be able to get to the future value, which is matching over here. And this is obviously quite useful because now you would know if I can't make a once-off payment, let's say it's a much larger future value that you're looking to achieve, and you don't have that capital up front, you can break it down into 5, 10, 3, no matter how many years you can change this over here. And of course, obviously, you can see the impact if you were to change this to end mode. You'll see how much of a difference it makes just by making that payment at the end of every period. The third calculator, where you can now calculate, put this onto begin mode, is you're now making payments every year, but you can escalate the payment. In other words, you can start off with a smaller amount and then escalate that by whatever percent you wish to increase the contribution by. So let's keep this simple. And let's say you put 10,000 Rand per year and you escalate that by 6%. In other words, 10,000 plus 6%. In the following year, 6%, 6%, and you do that for 10 years. What will happen is you'll need to calculate what we call the resultant rate. There's a specific formula to determine that, and that is generally taking the growth as well as the escalation, doing a calculation to get to 3.7736%. We round it off 3.77. You would then take the payments per year, calculate the present value, then take the present value using the growth rate and the term, which is 10 years, to get to a future value. And this is quite useful because, again, if a person doesn't have, for example, 100,000 payments per year, they can maybe make a lesser payment and escalate that per year so they can get to a future value. But what's important to note is that when you're adding escalations to your contributions, you generally will have a higher future value. Why? Because you are increasing your contributions. If I were to turn this off, you would see this is exactly the same. because there's no escalations, you're performing exactly the same calculation. You're doing the equivalent of a payment per year without escalations, and you'll see that the future values are identical. However, when you add in contributions, you can now physically see how escalating your contributions per year can result in a high future value. Just bear in mind, obviously, this is 10,000, that's 100,000. I'll have to go and change this to 10,000 over here. And I'll turn this off. You will see that it's 175,311, 175,311. So this is quite important because if you add escalations to that, you're now on 220,796 versus 175,311. And this is quite important because inflation eats into your growth. In other words, this is a return before we factor in inflation. This is the return after we factor inflation, if inflation was 6%. Obviously, we're escalating in line with inflation. Taking this example over here, 220,796, 220,796, doing exactly the same exercise over here. You will get to the 10,000 Rand. So again, going back to the same scenario, let's say you knew what the future value is for a specific target in the future, and you wanted to know how much to make per payments per year, escalating at 6%, you would put 10,000 away for a period of 10 years. So this is just basically, you know the future value, you want to work out how much you put away now, and this is how much I have. What can I expect to get in the future if I factor in growth of 10% and I increase my contributions by 6% per year? The last calculation is making monthly payments. There's actually one with and without escalation. Monthly payments means obviously you are making 12 payments a year for that duration. So you can take 12 times how many years it is, that's the total payments you're going to make. Let's put it on begin mode because I've already shown you why that's important. So let's say now a person puts away 1,000 Rand a month. The growth rate per year is 10%. This does not escalate. This is just purely 1,000 Rand invested for a period of 10 years monthly over obviously 10 years. The expected future value, if you invest 1,000 Rand, an easiest way to work out the growth is you take the contributions. So you take 1,000 times 12 times 10, and you can take, that's the total contributions you're making, and you can essentially work out value. Now, the value would be 120,000 Rand if you were to do that calculation, which means if you take 220,796 and you minus 120,000, that is how much you've accrued in interest by applying 1,000 Rand. Sorry, it's 206,552 minus 120,000. That is the interest accrued, and that's applying 1,000 Rand over 10 years monthly. And of course, obviously, if you take 206,552 and you do it again over here, 206,552, and we put in the growth rate 10, you'll get the 1,000 Rand. And I'll read both examples over here in terms of the explanation. Invest 1,000 per month for a period of 10 years and achieve an annual compound growth rate of 10%. The future value will be 206,552. And in order to achieve a future value of 206,552 in a period of 10 years, projected annual compound growth rate of 10%, the payment per month will be 1,000. Now, again, you're not countering inflation, because inflation is obviously going to impact your growth. If we said inflation was 6%, the real return is 3.776. So this value over here of 26,552 has not really been factored in for inflation. So to do that, one can then do another calculation, put 1,000 Rand away, 10 years, 10% growth, but you're going to escalate the contributions by 6%. And by doing that, obviously you're going to have a much higher future value. Now, if I turn this off, here's the value again. Sorry, it's 1,000, apologies. 1,000 Rand without escalation. Now, to calculate a future value working with an escalation, there's actually 3 steps one needs to do in their calculator to perform this. You first need to work out the present value, then you need to use the payments, and you'll need to work out the effective rate. I will get to the effective rate over here. And by doing that, you work out the present value with the effective rate. They take the present value, calculating the future value of the growth rate. Now, because we've taken out escalations, we've effectively performed this calculation, skipping the step of working out the resultant rate because there's no escalation. So this is now not factoring in inflation really, because you are using the same 1,000 Rand per month for 10 years. Now, if we factored in said, well, it's escalated by inflation, that value would then grow to 259,620, which means that this is factoring in the escalations. If escalations were in line with your inflation rate, which you said was 6%, then you would calculate the resultant rate using the effective rate. Effective rate here is 10.4713. Your resultant rate, therefore, would be 4.2182%. And that would be your real return if you're making monthly payments. And you will then get to 259,620. So if I can put in 259,620, using exactly the same assumptions, you should get to 1,000 Rand. Now, this is important because when you're looking to calculate future values, you need to factor in inflation always. If you don't factor inflation, this is the difference. If you make the same contributions without escalating it, you finish on 206,552 over 10 years. If you do factor in the escalation line with inflation, you have 259,620. So if I take 259,620 now minus 206,552, you have 53,068 Rand difference in future values because you have escalated your contributions, and we can say that's in line with inflation, which we say is 6%. And these three elements really do make a big difference: the begin-end mode, the growth rate, and also your escalation rate. The longer you invest, say you invest for 30 years, you will start to see the impact of your future values. Now, I want to show you something also quite important. Let's change this to 30 years. You'll start to see the compounding effect. You said 1,000 Rand without escalations, so not factoring in inflation, 30 years, exactly the same term, 10% return, exactly the same growth rate. Look at the difference in future values. 3.993 versus 2.279. So anyone who's got a retirement annuity or any investment and is not factoring in escalations, it doesn't have to be 6%. If you want to make it lower because of affordability, it is better than nothing. If I made it 4%, it's 3.2 million versus 2.2 because you're factoring in escalations. If I were to make this end mode, 2.26, 3.2. Obviously, with end mode, you're making your contributions at the end of each month. If I change it, so it's 3.222, 3.248. Not a huge difference when you consider it monthly, because the more contributions you make, your money is compounding every month. But again, if you're looking at begin and end mode for annual payments, as we said, at 10,000 Rand made at the beginning of the year, future value 175,311 versus 159. Now, if this was a large value, let's say this was 10 million, beginning and end mode is going to make a huge difference. 175 million, 159 million by making that payment. Now, of course, obviously, this is large amounts, but the point I'm making is when you show bigger numbers, there's a big difference between beginning and end mode. And of course, obviously, you don't see it initially But over time, as you're building your wealth, that can play quite a big role in your future values. Of course, again, obviously, example here, if you've got a future value in mind and you want to contribute as low as possible, which is 1,000 Rand, escalating at 6%, and that will then grow 10%. And over time, you will eventually grow to a future value in 10 years. So this is quite a useful calculator for you to first learn how present and future values are calculated, begin and end mode, the importance of growing your capital, investing for the long term, but also factoring in inflation by putting escalations in on your contributions every year. The last thing I just want to discuss is the effective rate. So the effective rate, let's just change this to 1. Nominal rate is 10. So if you're making payments once a year, your growth is going to occur over 12 months. In other words, it's going to grow 10% over a year. There's only one payment. There's only one payment per year. So that's 10% is going to apply to that lump sum. As I mentioned, if you make that lump sum, if it's on an annual basis, at the beginning of the period, that growth will occur throughout that 12 months versus making the payment at the end of the 12 months. If you're making 2 payments a year, which means it's every 6 months, your effective rate is going to be 10.25% because you're applying interest twice in that year. Quarterly, 10.38%, and then lastly, 10.47%. This just effectively means that if you're making payments per month, your interest accruing is at a rate of 10.47% to factor in the payments that you're making. As I said, the nominal rate is what you're expecting for the year, but because you're making payments monthly, the effective rate is calculated to determine what is the actual rate that I'm getting per month to get to that 10% nominal rate for the year. And that's important because you need to know what the effective rate is when you're calculating future values for monthly contributions that do escalate. And as I've shown you before, we switch off escalations and we use the same 1,000, put in begin mode, 2279325. So that's where this escalation is very important because you can see the difference in future values just by playing around with escalation rates. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. As I said, this template is available to download and go through it with me. The intent of this template, of course, is for educational purposes. This is not used for financial advice. Any recommendations that you receive will be discussed with a financial planner, ideally through a financial plan, because your goals first need to be established. You need to determine what your contributions are to get to a certain goal, and they will devise the correct asset classes for you to be invested in to achieve the desired growth rate, to achieve that future value, or determine what present value you need to have to get to that future value by using this template. Thanks for taking the time to watch this, and look forward to sharing further templates with you in the near future. Thanks for now.